All right, for this project, I'm going to be installing a HEX ezCAN. And for those of you who don't know what a HEX ezCAN is it's a controller that ties into the CAN bus system. These bikes are all controlled by a computer. Everything's an electronic signal. So basically, the CAN bus is how all of those devices are tied together. And the HEX ezCAN is a neat way to allow you to tie into that CAN bus system to control things like auxiliary lights, brake light, accessories, horn, and those sorts of things, all without adding additional buttons or switches to your bike. It uses the same switch gear that's on the BMWs. And then for the auxiliary brake lights, I wanted something more than just the stock brake light. So initially for the HEX ezCAN, I'm going to install brake lights. Later I will be adding some auxiliary driving lights. But for now, I'm going with the Hyper-Lite system. I looked at a lot of different lights, the Denali, the Clearwater Buddy light, I believe is what it's called. And for the money, I didn't find any that I liked any better than the Hyper-Lite. One thing I like about the Hyper-Lite is I like the idea of having two lights beside the license plate up. Instead of underneath it flat, I wanted it vertical. And so that was one of the reasons for choosing this. Now, one thing I will say is the Hyper-Lite comes with a little controller that allows you to tie in to any bike. You can tap into the wiring system. They provide the posit taps and everything with that, but I'm not going to be doing that on the BMW. I'm going to wire just the lights. I won't even be using this controller portion. I'll be wiring just the lights directly into the CAN bus, the HEX ezCAN, and let it control everything without having to tap into any other wires. So let's go ahead and tear into this and see what all we get in the with the HEX ezCAN kit. So it comes in this pouch, and that's everything. So let's take a look here. So in this bundle is the actual HEX ezCAN itself and some of the wiring harness. So when you stretch this out, of course, you have the device itself. Now the HEX ezCAN is very small. So additionally, in the CAN bus or the HEX ezCAN package, you get the pigtails to use to connect. So we'll tap our brake lights into the appropriate pigtail, and then it just simply connects into these waterproof connectors. So it's as easy as that. And then there's also a USB cable that comes with it. And then also there's a few plastic zip ties, cable ties to help neaten everything up. And then last is a couple of pieces of heavy-duty Velcro for mounting the HEX ezCAN. And then they give you a couple of terminator plugs. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the actual HEX ezCAN itself. So as you see, it comes pre-wired with a certain number of leads that come off of it. The longer lead, of course, is the power lead that will eventually run down and tap into the battery on the side. These two connectors are where this is going to tie into the CAN bus system. So the last four leads are, let me get these out of the way. We've talked about those three. The last four leads are these that have these weatherproof connectors on. Now, the two longer leads are your higher power leads that will go in power devices such as auxiliary driving lights, an air horn, something that requires a lot of power to run. These two shorter circuits or shorter lines are your low power circuits. Now, when you also have a USB connector here to plug your laptop into or computer into to run the software to program the HEX ezCAN. Now I already know how I'm going to have this connected. Today we're only going to wire up the auxiliary brake lights. So I'm going to be using the yellow circuit. If you'll notice, each one of these has a colored wire along with the black ground wire. So the orange and red are the two high-powered circuits. Yellow and white are the two low-powered. I already know that I'm going to be using configuration 1, and I'll show you that later in the software, which is going to allow me to use these two leads for the driving lights And then this one will be for, the yellow will be for the brake light, and white will be for accessory, like a GPS or a phone charger or whatever you would want to use. I probably won't use that on this bike because I already have USB up here, power up here, GPS is built in, so I'll probably cap this one off. And then you could use one of these for horn, and then run both of your driving lights off of a single circuit. But when you're running the lights on two individual circuits, you have a lot more control as to being able to shut them off, to turn when your turn signal's on, to do some really nice things, to wig-wag. So I'm going to be using this. I'm not going to be using something like a Denali sound bomb. I upgraded my horn to the BMW car horn, which is plenty loud enough. And that didn't require any other modifications. So first things first, I'm going to reach in here. Now you can remove this plastic upper level. It's just more work because I have to disconnect a lot of things to do this. And for the sake of clarity, it would be better for you, but I'm not going to go through all that just to connect this up. There we go. Pop the little lock, and then just work that connector right off this side. So you'll see we have this connector. Now the nice thing about using this is it doesn't void your warranty with BMW because you're not cutting any wires, you're not tapping into anything. And I want a nice, clean, professional installation. So you can see that this connector is just like this one that's on here. So what we're going to do is go ahead and take this guy and plug it into our TPMS, or as BMW calls it, RDC. It's German for tire pressure. So we just want to make sure that's connected snugly, and it is. And then we're going to take this connector here, and it looks like it'll only go in one way, so don't worry about getting that wrong. So if you try to plug it this way, it won't go any further than that. If you turn it this way, it pops right in there. So now we have that installed, and just making sure that it is seated all the way. All right. So now we're tied into the CAN bus, which means this device will talk to to the computer on board the motorcycle. Now you'll notice I'm not attaching power yet. I'm going to do that the very last thing. So I'm just going to leave this laying down here. So the next thing we're going to do again is I'm going to use one of my leads that came in this bundle. You'll notice that the leads they give you, we can set this other stuff apart, but the leads that are included are also color-coded to match the wire leads here, which I think is very nice. They're not just generic. So we're going to go ahead and set aside the red and the orange because we know those are our two high-powered connectors that I'm not going to be using today. And I'm also going to set aside the white one. So which leaves us with our yellow. So that all we're going to do now is go ahead and mount our lights. I'm not going to mount this yet because what I'm going to have to do is plug the USB into this once I get power to it and program it. But I'm going to go ahead now, and we know that we're going to have this attached to this, and I'm just going to plug that in there temporarily, and then we're going to go ahead and get the brake lights mounted and then run that up there. I have the Hyper-Lights just unpacked here, and as you can see they have plenty of wire that comes with them. With this, I could have easily popped the reflector off of here, pried the reflector off of here, and mounted the Hyper-Lights to the side. And some of you guys may like to do that, and that way you don't have to add any additional bracket. But I wanted to leave the reflectors on here. So when I don't have the side cases on, the reflectors are on here and still legal and all that fun stuff. So by adding this extra little bracket, I can't really turn it backwards to set the Hyper-Lights behind the license plate, but what I'm going to do is slide it right underneath behind the license plate here and the bracket, and then just get that centered. And I'll mount that. I'll put a couple of bolts in here to hold that. But what I'm going to do is center that to where it's about the same width as the reflector bracket on the back. And then what I'll do is mount the Hyper-Lights up here. So as you can see here, I've got the license plate frame off of here. It was just held on by 3 T25 screws here. And then up under here, behind the license, or behind the turn signals, there's 2 more Torx 25 bolts. And if you remove those out of this connector, then this allows this to drop down. Now, I didn't really have to remove the license plate frame, but I did that because I was exploring. And you'll notice there's two screw holes here. I guess that's 2 holes, not screw holes, but there's 2 holes here. I'm assuming it's for drainage. If any water gets up in here, it can drain out of those holes. But what that's going to do is make for a nice, neat channel for me to route my brake lights up through one of these holes, and then fish it back in here to get it up in the back to where the HEX ezCAN is. Okay, so before I run this wire, I just want to show you the wires were separate like this, except for at the very end where they had some heat shrink tubing on them. So what I did is actually just added some additional heat shrink tubing up to about here, and I have another section I can put on there. But I want to wait and see how far, because I think I'm actually going to end up cutting them about here once I get them fished through. So at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of twist it together a little bit here and fish it up through one of these drain holes. Again, it gives me a nice path to where it'll be nice and neat, nothing dangling. Okay, so now I have the wires run through the drain hole there in that bracket. So I'm going to move up here to where the turn signal lines come through, following the same path as the turn signal, so it'll be a nice, easy way to get in here into this compartment. All right, so at this point I have my wires run up, and I have an extra piece of heat shrink on there. So I'm going to need to trim these back. As you can see, we have plenty of wire here, and I don't want all this balled up in here because we still have to attach our little pigtail, our connector on. So I want to connect that back about here, and then that's going to leave me room to reach around and plug this in, because our ezCAN is going to be here. So that's, again, going to leave us plenty of room to make that connection. So at this point, what I want to do is I've gone ahead and slipped a couple pieces of heat shrink tubing up on the lead here. I've got my soldering iron warming up, and I'm going to go ahead and trim these wires back. I'm going to leave enough room so that I can bring this heat shrink tubing up and over to protect it. So I think I'm going to cut them around about right here. There's no electricity running through these yet, so it doesn't matter if you cut across 2 of them. So, and this is our excess wire here. And I'm going to wrap that up, toss it aside there. I'll save that because you never know when you might need some more wire of that gauge. So now on the Hyper-Lites, I have tested, and the brown is, as I expected, the brown is ground and the blue is the hot in this particular case. Now the reason that they use kind of an odd color is because this is actually meant to run to their controller, and they have the blue and the brown coinciding on the Hyper-Lite little controller. But as I've said a couple times, I'm not using their controller. I'm going to use the HEX ezCAN to manage these lights. So let me separate those a little bit. Grab my soldering iron here and see if it's warm enough. Now, I'm not soldering on any live circuits on the bike right now, just so that you know. This is just running to those Hyper-Lites, and they are not connected to any electricity right now. So I'm going to heat up the wire, keep touching. There we go. That's a good solder. I want to heat this set up. And there we go. I want to make sure the solder takes to the wiring. It did. So let that cool for just a second. And we're not going to let these touch, okay? So what I'm going to do is bend that back over. And then I've got a piece of heat shrink tubing on here, and that's what that's for. So now I'm going to run that up over that connection. I'm just using red because it's what I had, and it represents the hot circuit. And I'm going to do the same thing on the black, and then I'm going to run this separate up over here. And so that's going to protect these from touching, as well as any potential corrosion. So now I'm going to use my heat shrink gun to melt that. As you can see, it shrinks it, seals it right up on both ends. Doing the same thing to the black/brown circuit, the ground. And that's good. So see, now those are nice and tight and sealed. So see, this I think makes it look like a nice professional job. I mean, it's my bike. I take a lot of pride in it. I don't want it to look like a hack job if I ever sell this later. So these wires are protected by heat shrink tubing all the way back to the end point, to right here. So now we're going to just simply take this and find our yellow circuit here. Again, the yellow, black, and then we're going to go ahead and make that connection. And this is a watertight connection with these seals here. So get it started. And it takes some pressure because it's airtight, so it might want to push back on you just a little bit, and there, until it locks in place. So now we have our brake lights connected to our HEX ezCAN. So the last thing I'm going to do now is, before I mount this and program it, I'm going to need power to be able to get to the HEX ezCAN. So I'm going to take my two power leads. Again, the orangish, pinkish color here is going to be my hot because it's fused. There's a fuse in here, a 30 amp fuse. And then of course the brown is going to be the ground. And we're going to connect those over here on the side of the bike. But before I do that, I'm going to need to fish these lines down through here and bring them out down here to get down to the battery box. All right, so at this point, I've got the line fished underneath here. It was a bit of a pain to get it through with this big fuse connector on here, but you can do it without removing this. But you may want to, just to make your life easier. So I'm planning to run the wire down inside this wiring tray that's here, where there's the computer, and it'll tuck nice and neat out of the way. And then instead of running it down under to where the shock would be, I think I'll have to get this off here, so to determine what I think would be the best way to run it. All right, so then here is the positive connector, or the positive lead on the battery here. This red cap will come off, and then that screw comes out, and that's where we're going to attach our positive lead. The negative will go right here on the negative side of the battery. So as with any electrical connection, you want to attach the positive first and then the ground to avoid any sparking or surging there. So let's feed this through. I think that'd be the cleanest. It won't be seen. Then I'll put a cable tie here, and then we'll be able to make our appropriate connections. So let's grab I think this is a T25 here, and there's already those other two connections there. So what we want to do is just put this in here, connect these other two, put it back there. So let's go ahead and snug this back up. And then we'll put our cap back on that. That's a protective cap to keep anything from accidentally touching that. This ground terminal has it's a hex head, but it also has a Phillips screwdriver in the top of it. So again, I'm going to pull this out, make that connection there, and then again, like we did before, feed that back through. And then we can go ahead and tighten this back up with the Phillips screwdriver. Okay, so that is tucked away. So now we have our electrical connection to our HEX ezCAN. Okay, so at this point I've got the bracket mounted back, and I just routed my line down the center here, and then it splits off. I found that it was best to keep the wiring tucked out of the way if I came through these holes. Now the Hyper-Lites just barely squeeze through there. Just be careful, you don't want to peel your double stick tape off when you run it through, but they will wedge through there and come out here. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and put my fancy schmancy T2W license plate back on here. Blue Ridge Parkway. Support the Blue Ridge Parkway if you live in North Carolina or Virginia. You can buy these plates and the proceeds go to help support the Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation. This public service message brought to you by Tim Two Wheels. As you can see, I'm a big fan of the Blue Ridge Parkway, BRP here, BRP there, here. So it's an amazing road if you've never ridden it, or if you ever get the chance to visit North Carolina and Virginia, you owe yourself a ride on the Blue Ridge Parkway. Okay, so the license plate is on there. The bracket will go here. Now, this is going to slide up under here, as I mentioned before. These will tuck underneath. I'm going to go ahead and get some bolts in here. All right, so now before I mount these, what I want to do is take some rubbing alcohol and clean these surfaces right here nice and clean thoroughly so that the adhesive will stick to it as strongly as it possibly can. So the reason I've left this loose is that I need to tuck the wiring behind it, and also want to be able to adjust it a little bit. I'm going to bring it out here to the edge, line it up, and then stick it. All right. That's very sturdy, so I think it's going to hold well. And we'll do the same thing. I'll pull it out, get the wire underneath here. Get it lined up. Now, one thing I want to point out is other lights I've seen, they've been in aluminum housings and so forth. These are an ABS type plastic, or ABS, very rugged, very thick, and it's sealed nicely on the back. So they are waterproof, of course, they have to be. But the Hyper-Lites are pretty well made, and I like how bright they are. All right, so we've got that in there. The wiring is tucked in nice and neat. You don't even see it. And the rest is behind the plate. So now that I got this centered back up, so we'll tighten those up and then they're good to go. Next, we're going to program the HEX ezCAN to do what we want it to do. So I've connected my laptop to the HEX ezCAN, and it's doing a firmware update. So it detected before even turning the ignition on the bike, it's getting power. You can see the green light on the HEX ezCAN down here. And it asked me to do a firmware update after I registered, of course, and then now it's running through the update. So to connect to the device, no CAN bus detected, as you can see when it launched here. So it's going to need me to turn the bike on. So I have turned the bike on. As you can see, the error message went away, so it's communicating with the CAN bus and with the bike. So channel configurations, we can go through here and select which one of these pre-configured things we want. Let me zoom in here a little bit so you can see this. There's some good videos by both Twisted Throttle as well as the HEX ezCAN folks showing you how to pick this configuration. I'm going with configuration 1. I knew that ahead of time. At this point, though, the only thing I'm doing is configuring the brake light. So I'm going to need to disable the lights. But you can see some of the cool things you can do with this as far as strobe to pass, flash when you, or strobe when the horn is active, which is a great feature. There's some really good videos out there. But at this point, what I'm going to do is just disable these altogether. And then when I get my lights attached to it, I will come back and enable. So I'm going to shut all these off for right now. Now the brake light is what we are going to configure. I'm also going to disable the accessory power because I'm not going to use that either at this time, and it probably never will. So right now on the brake light, I do want it to run as a running light or a rear light. So I'm going to set the intensity to be, you can see the brake lights are actually working. So as I adjust the slider up and down, you'll see that the brake as a running lights. So there's 100%. So I want to run as a running light, probably somewhere around, there's 40%. I think I'm going to leave it at 10% there. That's 10%, and that when I get down to the same level as the tail light, it seems to be about the same brightness for that. Now, brake light, I've got set to 100%, and I'm going to take my mic off for a second, but I'm going to go test that and see how that looks. So I'm going to hit the front brake, and that's 100% intensity. That's 10%, 100%, 10%. So that's cool. For the brake light, I want it to be as bright as it possibly can be. So right now I've got it set here at 10% and then 100% for the brake light. So now let's get into the fancy stuff here. So for flashing, right now it's set to no flashing. Flash on braking. And this brake light will only flash above 15 kilometers per hour. Or you can set it to the California legal flashing, which gives you the strobes. Emergency signal stop. So that means that when the bike decelerates, it's going to, even without using the brake, it's still going to flash. And it will do the flashing. So basically what I'm wanting is the California legal with emergency stop signal. So the emergency stop again is even if you're downshifting and stopping quickly in that manner, it'll still flash the brake light, even without touching either the foot pedal or the handbrake. So we're going to leave it at that. So there's also some good information here. If you click on info, it'll tell you what each and every one of these looks like and what it's going to do. So now I turned off the 15 kilometer. I'm sorry, that's why it didn't flash for us earlier. So now let me go ahead and apply the brake and see if it does the flash for us. So that's the California stop. If I let off on the brake and hit it again, it's going to do it. Even if I tap the brakes, see, it's going to do the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so that's what I really wanted. That's the attention getter. I hope this was helpful. I know there's other videos out there on installing and configuring the HEX ezCAN, but I wanted to show you this in conjunction with the Hyper-Lite lights. I have not seen a video out there for that. I'm going to be adding driving lights later, some more. I'm still deciding on which ones I want to go with, but I'll show you how that gets configured. So anyway, I hope this is helpful. This is Tim 2 Wheels, and that's how I did it.